My name is Miriam Resnick. I'm a team leader with Equi-First Aid USA. We do a variety of classes around health and safety. And today I want to talk to you about biosecurity, specifically in regards to the current EHV outbreak. Um, just as a note in advance, this does not replace you talking to your veterinarian. This does not replace you checking your individual situation. It should just give you guidelines that you can base your decisions on to know what you have to research, where to find the resources, and whether it would be a good idea to call your state veterinarian or not. Um, The current outbreak started in Texas. I think at this point, everybody knows it. It was at a large rodeo, which tends to be a fairly common thing for outbreaks. Over 60 cases have been confirmed as of this point. Over 150 horses were exposed. The majority of cases are EHM, which is the neurological version of EHV. And the majority of cases are in Texas and Oklahoma. Um, To say a little bit about the virus itself, the equine herpes virus or equine rhinopneumonitis is a family of 9 different viruses. The most common ones are EHV1 and EHV4, with EHV1 having 3 different versions. One is a respiratory, one can lead to abortion, and one is the neurological, also called EHM, equine herpes myeloencephalitis. Okay, sorry, tricky word. Okay, I'm not going to try it. I'll just put it in the comments. Um, and right now, the majority are neurological. We have not had any abortion versions so far, but several respiratory. Transmission happens through direct contact from horse to horse. It can also happen through respiratory droplets, which can travel a little further than we normally think of with humans. So a 30-foot distance is required if you want to make sure that they don't travel from herd to herd. And of course, they can travel on contaminated environment and equipment. They can also be transferred through humans. Simplest form, your horse nuzzles you, and then another horse nuzzles you, and respiratory droplets will be traveling from one human. Whoops, oh goodness, I am sorry. From one human to another human, potentially, or from one human to another horse. We don't have to worry about getting infected ourselves. It's also extremely rare for other animals to get it. It has been reported in alpacas and llamas, but most livestock will not catch it. Dogs and cats cannot catch it. However, they still pose a risk for transmission simply because they are around our animals. A lot of farms I've been to have dogs. The dog goes from one horse to another, and if they say hi to the horse, now the respiratory droplets could potentially be on the horse's fur, on the dog's fur, and therefore transfer to another horse that will nuzzle that same dog. Um, the life cycle is something you need to be aware of because once a horse is exposed, uh, they may be asymptomatic for the entire incubation period, which is normally 2 to 10 days, can be up to 14 days. However, even if they're asymptomatic at that point, they are still shedding virus. They are just going to shed a lot less of the virus load than they would during the clinical phase, which is from the day the symptoms appear. The clinical phase of EHV1 and EHV4 usually takes between 2 and 7 days. However, with EHM, it can be significantly longer. And the recovery period for EHV is also much shorter than it is for EHM. During the clinical phase, horses will shed significantly. During recovery, it really varies. And then once they are fully recovered, the virus stays in the horse for the rest of their lives, which means it can be activated through stressors or anything that could compromise their immune system, which brings us back to the beginning of this cycle, where we may have an exposure due to activation of a latent virus. Preventative health care is important. You can vaccinate horses to EHV1 and EHV4. There is no vaccine for EHM, and the EHV1 and EHV4 vaccines are not guaranteed vaccines. They have a reasonably high efficacy. However, it is still possible that your horse will catch the virus. Chances are that it will be much milder and that they will shed a lower virus load. So if your horse has a high risk, it's definitely a good idea to get them vaccinated. Doing daily vitals checks will help you figure out if symptoms occur early and will also help you detect anything that may be unusual to assist you in detecting it for early quarantine. Reducing stress on your horses will make them less susceptible, just like boosting their immune system. For boosting their immune system, nutrition can be a valuable source. Adding antioxidants like vitamin E can be a good source for an immune boost. Vitamin C is a good idea to add. And one thing specific to EHV is lysine. Lysine is an amino acid, and it works as an antagonist for another amino acid called arginine, and arginine is necessary for the replication of herpes viruses. So even though it is not an immunization, uh, it helps reduce susceptibility. Ideally, you should talk to your vet or your nutritionist about things to add to their diet that can help reduce the risk of getting infected with EHV1 or increasing their immune response. Symptoms. The first symptom usually is fever. The fever is considered 101.5 or higher. However, oh goodness, I don't know what my PowerPoint is doing today. However, there is always a possibility that your horse runs a little unusual. That's why we here at Equi-First Aid USA recommend that you take your horse's baseline so you know what is a normal temperature. If your horse runs on an extremely low temperature on a normal day, then even a temperature of 101 could be something to look into. The next symptoms that may occur are respiratory. That can be a new or worsening nasal discharge. It can be coughing, rapid or labored breathing. Lethargy can also happen, which would go into the behavioral part. Horses may lose their appetite or become depressed. If it is EHM, which, as I mentioned before, is the neurological version of EHV, you may also see additional symptoms like stumbling, dragging of toes, crossing of hind legs, difficulty turning, standing white-faced or sitting like a dog, tail weakness, urine dribbling, and incontinence. They may also lie down significantly more and are not willing to get up. The diagnosis is done through nasal swabs and blood samples. That's where we can figure out if they are actually infected with EHV1 or EHV4. For EHM, there is no definitive test. So if a horse is showing symptoms of EHM, the neurological signs that I mentioned in the previous slide, then we will, or your vet will do a differential diagnosis to ensure that there is nothing else that could be causing those symptoms. And if nothing else can explain the symptoms, then they are diagnosed with EHM. Prognosis for EHV is really good. Most horses have a full recovery within roughly a week and have no long-term issues. However, the virus does remain latent, so the horse will have a chance of getting the virus again in a future setting. EHM has only a 70% survival rate and can have long-term neurological deficits as a side effect. However, early treatment and early detection will improve your horse's chances of making a full recovery. I see somebody is asking if if they need to change their slides themselves. Everybody should be seeing the slides. They should be switching themselves. My technology apparently is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. This is our first Equi-First 8 USA public webinar, so I apologize for any issues, but if necessary, I will create a separate recording to make sure that you get all the slides. Okay. Treatment for all horses, you will need supportive care. That's your foundation for any kind of treatment. That means rest, keeping them in a comfortable environment where they do not have to move a lot in order to stay warm. You may need to blanket them depending on your weather. We are in winter right now, so depending on your state, it may be necessary to make sure that they're in a warmer environment than a run-in could provide, or you need to blanket in addition. You want to make sure they get plenty of fluids. And on top of that, your vet will most likely decide medication for EHV1. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are common, which would be your bute or banamine. They will help reduce the fever, which in turn will help with appetite. So the horses will get the energy to make a quick recovery. Uh, when EHM is diagnosed, your veterinarian will most likely add antivirals. Depending on the severity, they may also add anticoagulants like heparin or aspirin to reduce the risk of thrombosis, because horses that have severe neurological issues may need to be supported by a sling and therefore will not have the movement to keep the blood properly flowing. Catheters may have to be used to ensure that the fluids can be measured and that they're going where they need to go, and IV fluids may have to be given. Individual risk factors. This is where you have to think about, are my horses endangered of getting the virus? Are my horses in danger of having a bad outcome? Age extremes are one of the first things to consider, because young foals and older horses generally have a less effective immune system, so they're more likely to be impacted. Immunocompromised and stressed horses, it will be the same. Pre-existing illnesses or poor body condition will also make it harder for your horse to fight off the virus. Genetics play a role. For example, warm bloods are more susceptible than ponies, but one factor that is harder to determine just from looking at your horse is the individual susceptibility. Some horses tend to just be more likely to catch viruses, just like with us humans. But as I mentioned in the beginning with the preventative health care, if you help boost their immunity, you can do a lot to reduce the individual susceptibility. External factors are horse movement, and that includes movement outside of the facility, but also movement within the facility. Human movement is a factor. We're talking about the people who enter your barn and leave your barn, but also people who go to different areas of a barn. If you are in a small environment, you will have a lot less humans that come and go and that move around. But in a larger environment, you may have trainers coming in, people trailering in their horses, in addition to your healthcare providers and your hoof care providers. Shared spaces and equipment will increase risks. So if you are using an arena that everybody uses at your facility, that would be a shared space to be aware of and figure out how your barn handles the sanitization. And the same goes for equipment. One major issue with equipment that people tend to overlook is the hose, because we like to just drop the hose in the bucket and hold it there. But at that point, you have cross-contamination with the hose. The facility layout makes a big difference. If you have one path that all horses go, that increases the risk too. Biosecurity protocols that are in your barn will change your risk factors. And of course, event exposure is your biggest external factor. If you want to learn more about event exposure and event biosecurity, the webinar that the AAEP put on recently is fantastic, and you can find it on their social channels and on their website. Additional risk factors: high performance or competition horses tend to have a lot more stress on their body due to their exercise regimen, and therefore may have a higher likelihood of getting infected. Recent transport or relocation, of course, is a high risk because they go from one barn to another. And in addition, it depends on the sanitary conditions of this specific trailer. If you can avoid using somebody else's trailer, that's definitely a plus. If you're using a professional, make sure that they have the proper procedures in place, that trailers are completely disinfected between horses. And then social stress from herd changes can also impact the immune system. Now we're going into the biosecurity protocols. First part is the human factor. When you arrive, you should wash your hands before, but also after you handle horses. Hand sanitizer will help, but it is not as efficient as good old-fashioned soap and water. Disinfecting boots and clothing when you're moving between barns or individual herds is very important. For the clothing, recommendation is to change them, because just running them through the laundry will remove the virus. For boots, you can create disinfection stations, but I will go into the disinfectants you can use at a later point, and what you need to take into consideration. Limiting visitors and assign who takes care of which horses should be done, especially in larger barns, to avoid cross-contamination between different groups of horses. And when you're handling any sick or exposed horses, the recommendation is to wear gloves, so you have a lower risk of transporting it from one group to another. Healthy equines. The first thing to do for all healthy equines is maintaining daily temperature checks. The AEP recommends to do them twice a day and do them at the same time of day. Throughout the day, temperatures will fluctuate. Things to also take into consideration is the ambient temperature. So if you are having an exceptionally warm day and an exceptionally cold day, there will be minor fluctuations. But as long as they are just minor, you don't need to be concerned about. Just when you're reaching those higher temperatures that come close to a fever or are considered a fever. Keep your turnout groups consistent and ideally small. So if a group gets exposed, you have less horses that need to be quarantined. Don't share water buckets, don't share feed tubs or tack. If anything is shared, it has to be disinfected after every individual use. And once again, do not put the hoses into the buckets because at that point you are cross-contaminating just by moving hose from bucket to bucket to bucket. And of course, avoid nose-to-nose contact with horses that are not part of the same group. Biosecurity for new arrivals. If you have a horse that just arrived at your barn, even if there is no outbreak, the recommendation is to quarantine them for 14 to 21 days in a separate area. I have heard multiple stories of horses arriving and being perfectly healthy for 10-ish days or more, and then something was detected that could have infected the entire barn. So I really urge you, if you have horses come in, quarantine them for the full 21 days. Create a quarantine area for it. New arrivals, it's even more crucial to monitor the temperature twice daily. And since you don't know the horses as well, you should monitor their behavior so you can learn what is normal for them. If the owner has already had the horse before, they would know how the horse behaves, but something may change because of the new environment. So it is still important to keep an eye on anything new to make sure what is a sign of behavioral changes due to health and what is a sign of behavioral changes due to the stress of moving. Definitely use separate equipment and make sure nobody handles the new horse and the horses that are already on the farm without proper biosecurity protocols, including your hand washing, changing of clothes, etc. And they should have absolutely no contact with resident horses until they are cleared. If your vet gives you the go-ahead before 21 days, that's great. Then you can absolutely move them together. But without the vet, wait the 21 days. Biosecurity protocols for your facility. You should have signage that explains what is expected of everybody who comes and goes. In addition, keeping a record of everybody who enters the barn and leaves the barn, which portions of the facility they are entering, which horses they are interacting with, and also record horse movements. For example, when you are moving horses from their stall to turnout, write down which turnout they're going into, which other horses they are going with. So you know that if one of these horses gets exposed or is tested positive, that the other horses are also at risk. Mark things in your barn in a way that everybody knows what area is quarantine, what area is healthy horses, what area is exposed horses. So, for example, in on this picture, the green section would be the healthy horses, and the red section would be the quarantine zone. Make sure you keep up with your disinfectant protocols. Because that is going to be your number one protection from anything that could spread through your facilities. The common areas should be cleaned at least once a day, if not more often. It depends a lot on your traffic flow. If the horses are not moved, once a day can be enough. But if the horses are moved, those areas should be cleaned after each move. Another thing is to consider barn cats. A lot of facilities have those, and you want to make sure that those barn cats do not run between areas with exposed or quarantined horses and healthy horses. Because just like with the barn dog, if the horse says hi to the cat, now the cat has respiratory droplets on their fur and can move to another area of the facility where where another horse can pick up those droplets. When you have infected or exposed horses, isolation has to happen immediately, and it should be a designated area. Do not just close off whatever stall or paddock they usually live in, but make sure they are separated by at least 30 feet. People who take care of them should be reduced. Only dedicated people are allowed to handle them, and the equipment should be completely separate. I would even recommend to have a separate manure pile for that time because you don't want to move a wheelbarrow from a quarantine area or isolation area to a regular area and disinfect every time between. Enhanced personal protective equipment is recommended. It will make it a lot easier if you use gloves and coveralls rather than having to change your clothes multiple times a day. And after every contact, everything should be disinfected immediately. The virus can survive on surfaces for up to a month, depending on the conditions. If you leave the virus on any of the surfaces, um, once you reintegrate it, it could cause another infection by contact. Disinfectant use. The first thing you need to consider is what products are effective. Some products, like bleach, get deactivated once they come into contact with organic matter. So it will not really work that well in a horse environment because what do we have there everywhere? Dirt, manure, organic material. Um, your easiest and most accessible would be hydrogen peroxide. However, regular hydrogen peroxide has a long contact time. You can get accelerated hydrogen peroxide like Prevail or Rescue. There are a multitude of other products that can be used, including quaternary ammonium products. But when you are considering different products, you also should think about your existing cleaning protocols. A lot of barns use bleach to clean their troughs after every use. Every time they dump them. And when you mix ammonium and bleach, you get a noxious gas that can be deadly if inhaled. So you need to really read the instructions and the safety guidance on whatever product you're using before you mix and before you utilize them. Also, make sure you have access to cleaning stations in case somebody gets some of the cleaning product in their eye or on their skin, because the quicker you respond to any kind of exposure like that, the better the chances are that there is no long-term issues because of it. Before you clean any area, remove the dirt. Even products that don't get deactivated by dirt or other organic materials will not be able to penetrate if you have a thick layer of dirt on something. After that, make sure the contact time is held properly. Accelerated hydrogen peroxide needs to stay wet on the surface for about 1 minute. However, regular hydrogen peroxide, depending on the strength, needs 5 to 10 minutes. So that doesn't mean you have to be in the foot bath for 5 to 10 minutes. However, your boots have to stay wet for 5 to 10 minutes. Your manure fork has to be wet for 5 to 10 minutes. That's why I recommend getting accelerated hydrogen peroxide rather than the regular stuff that you can buy in a hardware store or at a pharmacy. Frequency of cleaning is very important because we want to clean everything, as I mentioned before, daily at a minimum. Anything that is shared should be cleaned after every use. Things that are exposed to horses that are in quarantine or isolation should be cleaned after every use. And you need to make sure that people disinfect their boots when they enter your barn, but also when they leave your barn, because they don't want to traipse it over to another person's barn and potentially infect other horses. All of this should lead to a reasonably high safety margin for your biosecurity. Um, However, there is always a possibility that there are some holes that you missed, like the barn cat. So every facility has to take a look for what is relevant for them. When I look at my own facility, I just have 3 horses in my own backyard. It's a lot easier to close all those holes. However, there are horses across the street from me. If these horses were to get out, they could expose my horses. If one of the neighbor cats runs between their barn and my barn, that could also cause a cross contamination, but it is a very low risk of that happening. So you need to look at your individual facility, your individual risks, and figure out what factors play a role in your own biosecurity protocols. Make sure everybody is aware of those protocols. And if somebody is not willing to follow those protocols, you need to have a sit down with them and really talk about the necessity or come up with a plan so this particular person does not endanger everybody in the barn. Now, I have some resources for you that I highly recommend. The first one is the Equine Disease and Communication Center. It will give you the real-time updates and alerts. That's also where you would report if you have a case at your barn. The AEP has a wonderful write-up for guidelines with comprehensive protocols for disease prevention. Your state veterinary offices will be able to give you local updates, and there are links from the EDCC to the state veterinary offices. The USDA APHIS equine health page has federal guidance and disease control resources. And if you want to dig a little bit deeper into EHV and EHM, the MSD veterinary manual will be very helpful. I will send out additional reading and the sources, as my chat did not apparently take it. As I said today, I'm having terrible technological issues. But before we finish, I want to share the EDCC website with you, which of course has have to click the right button to share. There we go. Okay, so the EDCC website is going to be your first resource for any kind of disease outbreak. Up here, you have alerts and news. Under reportable diseases is where you will find what diseases have to be reported in your state, but also the links to your state veterinary office. You can submit a report, but for the current situation, your most interesting link is following the infectious disease one. When you scroll down, you can select which disease you are looking for. I'm clicking on the equine herpes virus. Now, On the left side, there is an explanation, including clinical signs, diagnostics, treatment and prevention, and biosecurity. But if you scroll back up, you also find several fact sheets and resources. And if you click on View More Alerts, you can select your state. In this case, it's the respiratory version that is shown. So here is a map that shows you which states had cases. You can look into the individual states and apply your filter to see what the risk in your individual state is. Okay.